For over 15 years, Saturdays in Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Manouk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mindell. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now, the official sports betting partner of the Winnipeg Jets, starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Kentucky. And for all those joining us, wherever you may be around the world on this Saturday morning, we wish you good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Along with Ezra Ginsburg, along with Connor Hrabchuk, a far better replacement of Dave Manouk. I'm your host, Drew Mindell, here for the next couple of hours, getting you set for tonight's Jets Wild game, delving deep into the Winnipeg Jets as they look to recover from the disappointing defeat against the Anaheim Ducks on Wednesday night, and a road trip that left many questions regarding the quality of their play despite the 1-1 record. Gentlemen, great to see you both on this Saturday morning, and lest anybody get you thinking that Kentucky is in the deep south, I would like to point out I'm very, very cold at the moment.
Well, you might be very, very cold, but I don't think it's anywhere as close to as cold it is here in the Peg, Drew. So,
but I'm not broadcasting outside in Winnipeg.
I don't see any snow on those trees. Right. I don't see any snow on that ground. So I think you're doing much better than Connor and I. That's for sure. I'm not sure if Connor's going anywhere warm this year. I'm certainly not. So I'm embracing the cold weather. I think it's supposed to warm up a little bit more in Manitoba, but look, it's the end of December. It's usually -20, -25. So
it's true. I guess I shouldn't complain. I the option of broadcasting outside does exist for me, where if you guys were broadcasting outside,
humble brag,
it would not go very well for either of you or for your technology, I would say. Connor, good morning. A pleasure to have you on with us. We're putting you to work today, my man.
Yes.
You got the Saturday morning show, then you're going to join me a little bit later on tonight for the post-game show after the Jets and the Minnesota Wild. We're going to have to change that at Connor Hrabchuk 1 Twitter handle to at Connor Hrabchuk IC very, very quickly.
Yes, and I'm going to need my backwards hat if I'm replacing Dave Manouk, but I'm super fired up. This is going to be a fun day. I mean, I'm so excited for this game tonight between the Jets. It's always the Jets and the Wild. I mean, Saturday night at home, it's going to be amazing. And then we get to talk about it. We get to preview it for 2 hours and then talk about it after the game, have the initial reaction. And then I'm going to be on the IC postgame show Monday as well after the Leafs game. So I'm having a heck of a weekend. I'm super fired up.
Can we, I just need to rant for a second, if you guys will allow me. The fact that the Winnipeg Jets, a Canadian team, are playing the Toronto Maple Leafs, also a Canadian team, on a Monday afternoon at 1:00, to me is an insult to the Winnipeg Jets. And let me hear me out. They always play this afternoon game. The Leafs do this right around sort of the Christmas time. They always play a Monday afternoon game. It's a game against, where kids can come. They bill it as a family game or whatever they bill it. It's a cool idea. I have no problem with the idea whatsoever. But I do think that it is insulting to the Winnipeg Jets organization that they are getting that game. Typically, two Canadian teams should be playing against each other, especially when they only play in Toronto once per year. That should be a more marquee game. Doesn't have to be Saturday night necessarily, but it should be a Wednesday night. It should
not
be
1:00.
Game.
Anything but 1:00, right? Like, honestly, boys, even if it was at like 3:00, like the 1:00 time, it's December 23rd. Obviously not today. Today's the 21st. I mean, it's going to be December 23rd when the Jets and the Leafs play. And it's just it's a time where, people are getting their last minute shopping in, or some people are already having their family get-togethers or family dinners, right? So it's good in the sense that, right, for an early game, you get more kids being able to go, but school's already out at that point anyways, right? So
I just think that there is no other Canadian team. They wouldn't put the Canucks in that slot against the Leafs. They wouldn't put the Flames or the Oilers.
Fair point.
Think the Jets typically are getting the short end of the stick. I think that I bet you that if you injected Mark Chipman with truth serum, he would not be happy about being saddled with that game. It should be a more prominent game on the NHL schedule rather than a Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock. I mean, I think in past years, it's been a game that the Carolina Hurricanes play against the Leafs, or the New York Islanders, or just teams that don't have the same panache, in Toronto as the Winnipeg Jets do, with the cavalcade of Jets fans that would and maybe are still attending that game on Monday. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. Maybe I'm just too sensitive, but that's my thoughts there, Connor, as well.
Yeah, and I think the comment we just had up, I'm not sure who said it, but the Jets aren't a big draw. I mean, as much as we want to say, yeah, like the Jets can be the number one team in the league, they're still not going to be a big draw.
But they are in Toronto. There's going to be thousands of Jets fans at there typically would be thousands of Jets fans at. I'm not talking about television. Forget about television in this aspect. I'm talking about strictly from a fan experience opportunity. The Jets should not be on a Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock.
And I think what Connor was referring to is more so nationally. The Jets are not a big draw. Locally, yes. There's a lot. I mean, I'm sure, guys, between the three of us, we could name dozens of people that we know that originally grew up in Winnipeg that live in Toronto, right? Like, there's a lot of ex-Winnipeggers, ex-Manitobans, or people that have lived in Toronto for a long time that used to live in Winnipeg, born in Winnipeg, whatever. But I agree with you. It's just overall, Drew, like, before we, get into the breakdown of the Jets and everything like that, I just think it's an awful time for a hockey game. Like, and I'm not talking about us doing the post-game show. I'm just talking about people watching the game, right? Like, because I think the chat will probably back us up here. Like, the 23rd, there's always those last-minute Larrys, right, that have to get their last-minute Christmas or Hanukkah presents, right? So it's just not an ideal time, 1 o'clock on a Monday for a hockey game. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're all going to watch it. It's just, I mean, I think we can just leave it at that it's just a terrible time for a game. And also, Drew, I agree with you. It's a marquee matchup. It's the first place team in the Central versus the first place. I think the Leafs are still first in the Atlantic, right? Or at the very least, they're top
They
two
wouldn't
team.
have known that before the schedule would have started. I just think you don't put a Canadian team in that game on a Monday afternoon. That you just don't put the Canadian team in there. You find a better slot that Sportsnet should want a better slot for that. I mean, that's just what I'm saying. I just thought it was from the day one when the schedule came out. I thought it was a stupid game time and a stupid time for the Jets to have to be playing.
Is it a Sportsnet game or is it a prime game?
No, it's a Monday afternoon game. I think it's a TSN 3 game. I assume it is.
TSN 3. Yeah.
Oh, it is TSN 3.
It's a regular game, but I mean, it just seems like it's a game that screams out for more of a national broadcast and more of a prominent spot. Anyways, that's me being cranky and old. I see that somebody in the chat is already criticizing me as per usual, but that's okay. I come here and I bring my takes, whether or not you agree with them. Let's move on to the Winnipeg Jets and the 2-game road trip into California, gentlemen, should have been 2 wins based on paper. They don't play the games on paper. We know that. But based on record, based on reputation, based on the calibers of the teams playing, most people would have penciled the Jets, even on a back-to-back, in for 2 wins. There were some troubling signs, I would argue, on that road trip. The Jets got caved in against San Jose until the third period. They end up getting the victory there. That game against Anaheim was an absolute atrocity. They end up losing justifiably in regulation after a bad turnover with seconds to go. Connor, I want to bring up a tweet that you put out. This is a couple days ago, mind you, but the numbers will still apply. Over the last 18 games, the Jets are 8-9-1. We know they started incredibly. We know they had the downturn. We know that they had a better winning record as of late over the last, say, 8 games, but over the last 18 is what we're going with. Over that time at 5-on-5, the Jets are 30th in goals per 60, 29th in scoring chances per 60, 25th in expected goals per 60, and 25th in shots per 60. All numbers that are in the bottom third of this NHL. If the power play were to slow down just by 5 to 7 percentage points, it would still be a good power play, but just a slight slowdown in the power play, this Winnipeg Jets team would have a lot of difficulty putting the puck in the net, something Ezzy has been talking about over the last couple of weeks as well. How much of a mirage is the Winnipeg Jets as of late, over the last 15, 18 games? How much of a mirage are they, and how concerned would you be with the quality and caliber of play, particularly at 5-on-5?
Yeah, I mean, I did get some questions as to why I used 18 games in that sample, and that's just since the 15-1 start. So they went 15-1 the last 18 games. They've been a below 500 hockey team. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle of those two teams, as many people have argued.
Yeah.
But yeah, the power play and Connor Hellebuyck are carrying the Jets right now, even to a below 500 record over their last 18 games. And to me, when I'm watching these games, all that stuff at 5-on-5 lines up. Like you see the Jets go on these long stretches without recording a shot on goal. The Anaheim game, they're getting outshot 18-4 when Toronto makes that game 1-0, right? So it's just there are these long stretches of not generating anything, not getting any shots on goal. And it feels as though, at least when Nikolai Ehlers was out, Nikolai Ehlers missed 8 games of those 18. It felt as though everything was kind of placed on the top line. And Connor, Scheifele, Vilardi, if they didn't have a good night at 5-on-5 or didn't have a good night in general on the power play, the Jets really had no chance. And now with Nikolai Ehlers back, maybe you get some more secondary scoring. You can get another line that can maybe contribute a goal or two or some chances at 5-on-5. But the Boston game's a great example. The top line had a great night, and the Jets won 8-1, and that was that. And the very next couple games, they lose to the Anaheim Ducks because the Scheifele line isn't really going. But the Sharks game, maybe they didn't even deserve to win, but the Scheifele line kind of turned it on there, and Lowry scores a late goal. So I just felt everything was placed on the Scheifele line, and if they didn't have a good night, whether 5-on-5 or on the power play, the Jets really were going to struggle, and they needed Connor Hellebuyck to bail them out of some games, and that's what happened for a lot of these. But with Nikolai Ehlers back, it's no secret that they have to generate more shots, more scoring chances, and more goals at 5-on-5.
Well, to Connor's point there, Ezzy, about the Jets being so reliant on that top line, particularly with Ehlers out of the lineup. And I mean, that's, all due respect, Connor, that's not breaking news. We all know that. We all, yes. I mean, I like the numbers you put out there. I think that sort of crystallized it for a lot of people. Would you consider switching things around to see if you can start generating more offense throughout the lineup, Ezzy? Is it time to, Connor, Scheifele, Vilardi, we know that they've been great, certainly as of late. We know that they have been the drivers offensively for the Winnipeg Jets, but are they too top heavy?
Sorry, Drew, but just to cut in here, they're doing most of their damage on the power play.
Fair.
Right?
Yes.
And that's, I think, to Connor's point, there's these long stretches of games where the Jets just not only do they not have a lot going on offensively, they're struggling to generate shots, right? Like, it's one thing if you're generating that shot quality and you're just not getting the goals, but that line included is having trouble on the defensive side of the puck, and they're not getting the types of looks that they were getting in the first 16 to 20 games, right? So I think the whole team is struggling at 5-on-5, including the Scheifele line. They're obviously getting their points on the power play, and I want to give a shout out to Connor's good buddy Jacob Stoller, our good friend too. He had a good article on sportsnet.ca, and he was talking about this exactly, and talking about how the forward line specifically need a shakeup. And I agree with Jacob. I think, I don't know if I'm necessarily, making major changes. Like Scheifele, Connor, Vilardi would be the one that maybe you keep there. And obviously the Lowry line is the line that, I mean, it almost seems like, sacrilegious to suggest breaking up the Lowry, Appleton, Niederreiter line, right? But I think when you're talking about that second line, that's where it starts for me, boys. That line, even now, Nick Ehlers is back in the lineup. He's been back for one game. So obviously, we're not going to put too much pressures on Ehlers that, he comes back and he has to solve all of the problems. But we know that he's the play driver on that line. He's the most talented player on that line. We've said this so many times. He's the one-man zone entry. He creates a lot of offense off the rush. He's just one of the Jets' best players. So to have him back is huge. But I still think, Nemesnikov, Perfetti, and Ehlers, that line, even going back to when Ehlers was healthy, that line at times was having trouble generating offense, right, guys? So I think you have to start with that second line. And I don't necessarily have, the magic answer in terms of, who you put there. This goes to a longer conversation about the Jets' need for a second line center, I think.
Well, we've talked about that, though. We've talked about the upgrade. We all expect, Connor, that the Jets will make an upgrade to this roster. They usually do when they're in a position to succeed, and they think they are in a position to succeed given their place in the standings. That's a logical conclusion. We've talked about, we've talked about if it's going to be on the back end. Last week, we would have said it needed to be on the back end. This week, we're speculating it needs to be up front. Well, quite possibly it needs to be both, which would make probably most people very happy. That's easier said than done, of course. But it just, again, if at the beginning of the year, you had said the Jets have the 10th best power play in the NHL, most people would have taken that. They would have said, okay, great, 10th best power play. That's a real big step up. That's a real big improvement over last year. That's going to result in a lot of better results for this team. Well, the power play we know is first. If they drop to 10th or something like that, all of a sudden, it's going to end up being catastrophic likely for the Winnipeg Jets in terms of the win-loss, unless something else gets going 5-on-5.
Yes, and to Jacob's point, and as he mentioned the article there, the Connor Scheifele-Vilardi line and the Lowry line are the top two lines in minutes played in the entire NHL. And the Ehlers line, funny enough, is actually 9th. And Nikolai Ehlers missed 9 games. So where would they be if he had played and they had, kept those lines together? But these are the two most used lines in the NHL. And it's kind of, there's one side of the argument where the Jets are the number 1 team in the NHL. So it's hard to kind of criticize the fact that they've had the same lines and they've clearly worked. But I would like to see a shakeup as well. And it goes back to that point that you just brought up, Drew, that if the power play does go cold for a 4-game sample even, or a 10-game sample or a month, say it has an off month, the Jets are kind of screwed right now because they're not generating anything at 5-on-5. And it goes back to what I said earlier about everything kind of being placed on the top line. When that top line's not going, and Scott O'Neill, we spoke to him yesterday after practice. He kind of mentioned this in the 15-1 start. All 4 lines were rolling. And now, you're seeing the Scheifele line maybe have an off night, or the Lowry line have an off night and not generate anything. And then the second line without Ehlers had a lot of off nights, and then Nikita Chibrikov gave them a spark. But it's kind of just this, who's going to be going, who's not going to be going. And when you get that included with a maybe inconsistent power play, when that starts to go cold, that's when things are going to really affect the score sheet, I think.
And Connor, you wonder, if we've obviously talked about this a lot. I know you've brought this up and it's been talked about when you've been on Winnipeg Sports Talk, or I'm sure it's come up in your writing. The Ehlers Connor switch is something that is not a new idea. We've seen it a little bit. There's been little, spurts where we've seen Ehlers with Scheifele and Vilardi. I wonder if that's something they look at, right? It's kind of the idea that you're putting a little bit of a super line together, right? Obviously, Ehlers and Connors are both talented, and Connors arguably the most impactful Jets forward right now. But what I'm saying is, like, in terms of his speed and everything like that, and then with Connor, maybe like, isn't it time to experiment here, guys? Like another player that Drew's mentioned, maybe getting a bit of a bump up, Rasmus Kupari. Obviously, guys,
I'm less hot on that idea as of late than I was before.
Well, yeah, and I'll be honest, he hasn't scored in a while. He's been, what does he have? 2 goals, 3 goals. He's been stuck on that for a while. But and that's another conversation, guys, too. The 4th line, it seems like, there's, when things are going bad, there's a lot of lines that you can point to. When things were going good, like Connor was talking about before, when the Jets were 15-1, all of their underlying numbers were great, right? Power play is great. PK is great. 5-on-5 is great. Hellebuck is lights out, right? And now things are, and this isn't a unique thing to the Jets, by the way, guys. We could say this about a lot of teams. If you want to pick one team, you could say a lot of negative things about the Nashville Predators right now. A lot of people had them winning the division. I was close to picking them to win the division, right? So when things are going bad, you can point to multiple lines, but there's no doubt that there has to be some type of shakeup. I don't know, guys, by the way, if we see it necessarily in these last 2 games, but I'm curious to see if things aren't going offensively. Like, I'm expecting a much better effort, I think, as you guys are as well, against Minnesota in front of a home crowd. The Jets obviously know that
a Minnesota Wild team, by the way, that played last night and lost to the Utah Hockey Club.
And we'll get into that more. And they've been struggling. They've lost 4 of their last 5, 3 in a row. A weird thing about the Minnesota Wild, I'm sure you guys noticed this too. They're unbelievable on the road. Like their road record, what are they, 12-2 or something? 12-2-3, I forget, something like that. But their road record is significantly better than their home record, something that you don't normally see from teams. But I think going back to this idea of changing forward lines, you wonder if that's an option to. Ehlers has only been back now for a game, so I'm not sure if you necessarily see that. But we're just spitballing, right, guys? Because there's no doubt anybody who has watched this team over the last 3-4 weeks, can see that the offense is dried up. Aside from obviously the power play and a little bit, from the Scheifele line, a little bit, you've seen, spurts from the Lowry, Niederreiter, Appleton line, but certainly, Cole Perfetti's got to get going. Vlad Nemestikov, the offense is dried up. Obviously, Ehlers is going to help that lineup, but there's something that's stagnant about these lines, guys, that I think, you have to ask yourself, like, the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again.
I thought the definition of insanity was continuing to broadcast the Illegal Curve hockey show over and over again.
I set you up for that one. No, but I mean, it's not now. It's like, Connor, is now not the time to experiment with some different lines. Like, I'm not saying like, have Scheifele as your third line center. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, even a subtle move, if it's elevating Niederreiter into the top six, I'm not sure. I don't have the answers. Obviously, Scott Arniel and the coaching staff, they're the ones who have to make those decisions. But clearly, the 5-on-5 offense is a big issue. You outline that in your most recent article for IC.
Yeah, and just real quick, last thing on that is,
go ahead.
They do have time to experiment with it, right? Like, excuse me, they're the number one team in the NHL, and they have built that. And despite being below 500 in their last 18 games, they're still the number one team in the NHL. And it's like, they're likely, I mean, we've talked about it, they're probably going to upgrade that second line center spot, or they're going to look to at least. But these are the lines I think they want to go into game one of the playoffs with, is that Connor Scheifele, Velarde trio, the Lowry line. But you kind of have to see at some point what you have in maybe an Ehlers flip, or maybe Niederreiter up on that second line with Cole Perfetti, or something to that nature, or with Nikolai Ehlers. What would that duo look like? What would Connor Scheifele Ehlers look like? We've seen that in the past, and they've had great underlying numbers and outscored their opponents. I do think that we're not going to see it in the next two games, despite how bad the Jets play. And I agree with what Dave said on the post-game show after the Anaheim game. That was a good thing the Jets lost, because
Connor, we never agree with anything Dave says. It's just that's just the base rule. You pretend somebody else said it if you want to agree with it, or you don't even acknowledge who said it.
Connor, I'm impressed that you listened to the post-game show, because that post-game show wrapped up at like 1:15 in the morning.
Oh, and then I listened to Kenny and Rennie too, both nights. It was
to be young again, as he is the answer there. to have that youthful exuberance that you and I don't have.
Yeah. I was on the show, Connor, and I was sleeping.
Yeah,
I don't see any gray in Connor's beard whatsoever.
But anyways, as I remember, someone was saying that it was a good thing that the Jets lost that game against Anaheim, because they can't keep getting away with this. Like, they can't keep getting away with having 5 shots on goal through 2 periods, or 8 shots on goal, whatever it was, through 2 periods, and then squeak away a win, right? So I thought that was a good thing that they lost. It maybe showed them that they got maybe a bit of a wake-up call, and maybe that they do need to shake up the lines, and maybe planted that seed of doubt in Scott Arniel's mind that we might see that going into January. But yeah, I do think that now would be the time, or soon, for a line shakeup. And now you just know that they're going to light up the Wild like 5-1 tonight. Now that we're talking about it.
For sure. I have that feeling too, that the Jets are going to explode for like 4 or 5 goals.
Yeah.
I've got the comment
all
up
at 5-on-5.
Yeah, exactly. All 5-on-5. The power play special teams will not be a factor.
And all 4 lines are going to score them.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kupari's
going to get one.
Down.
Morgan Barron might score a few empty netters, boys. Who knows? But we've got the comment up there for people that are listening on the podcast. He says, I would rather that they make changes within the game, but I would like to see Velarde centering the second line. I also saw that our buddy Brent Bellamy was also suggesting that. Like, I'd have time for that. And it depends, like, okay, so then who are you elevating to the top line? Because is Ehlers going to be playing on the right wing? Are you elevating Perfetti? Like, there you have to do so. And then is Nemesnikov then getting bumped down to the fourth line? Who's getting elevated? I think by moving Velarde to second line center, then you're opening up a whole bunch of different questions. Like the easy switch would be Kupari for Nemesnikov, I think. I don't know if I'm not saying, Drew, that it'll work. I'm just saying I think those are your options right now, because obviously, I mean, Iafallo can play in the top 6. We know Iafallo is not going to play left wing on the second line. I mean, the only other options you really have, I think, are elevating Niederreiter into the top 6. He's had a good season.
Yeah.
Or making that Ehlers and Connor switch on the left wing.
You're right. The options are not what I would describe as a plenty. There's no obvious fit for that second line center if that's where you're looking to make the switch. I mean, Nemesnikov, again, he does what he does. He does it to the best of his abilities. He's not a Stanley Cup caliber second line center. These are not insults, by the way. These are just mostly, relatively accurate opinions.
He doesn't score enough. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
He doesn't score enough for a second line center.
He's doing a yeoman's job there for the regular season. I think also, though, asking Vilardi a lot. This is a guy who hasn't played center in the last couple of years, really. I mean, sure, he was drafted to ostensibly be a center in the NHL, but there's been no sign that that's actually going to occur. So there's no obvious answer. I mean, I think that the problem is you just need to sort of shake things up and see if you can throw something at the wall and get it to stick, which is not necessarily what I would describe as a good recipe for success. You don't want to just experiment blindly to see what happens. You just need to find a way to get, maybe Ehlers coming back and being the driver on that line creates something. Perfetti has, if anything, I would say that to some extent, Perfetti has justified Rick Bowness's demotion of him by a lot of his absence in play. Maybe not as harshly as Bowness did, in the second half of last year, but Cole Perfetti, a guy who started hot and everyone had very high expectations of, has not met those expectations, I would argue, for a big chunk of this season. And I don't know that you can get him going. You look at him, and Jimmy Toth talked about his body language on the show last week, and there's flashes and there's glimpses and there's maybe hopes and spurts and everything, but there's nothing that would tell you that he's going to all of a sudden come out and be a line driver there on that second line, Connor.
Yeah, and I think there is a reason why we haven't seen Perfetti and Vilardi, who were both drafted as centers or came up as centers, play center or maybe stick at center at the NHL, and it's their foot speed. I mean, if you want to fact check me on it, you can go look at their NHL edge. They're not fast players. They're actually two of the slower players in the NHL, at least in terms of their like bursts, which means like they're skating over 20 miles an hour. They're two of the slower players, or they reach that threshold the least amount in the NHL. And I think the Jets want speed down the middle. That's why you have Kupari there. That's why you have Nemesikov. That's why you have Scheifele. Even Lowry, to an extent, can skate. I know he's obviously 6'5", and that's not his driving thing.
Right.
But
once he gets going, he can be a downhill truck.
100%. And I think the reason why maybe we saw Perfetti for 3 games last year, or we've seen Vilardi play center when Mark Scheifele's clearly dealing with something, is that they can fill in, but it's always a struggle because you need your centers to be fast enough to be the high forward, to be in the battles below the goal line, and then get up into the rush. And those players simply just don't have the foot speed to do that. Now, I still wouldn't hate seeing it with Vilardi in the middle and maybe a Niederreiter, a player that Niederreiter is a fast skater as well, but not a Nikolai Ehlers fast and can maybe move at the same pace kind of thing. But I think that's the overarching reason why we have not seen those two guys play center and stick at center. And when they have, it just simply hasn't worked for Vilardi and Perfetti.
Something for the Jets to keep an eye on. I agree with you. I don't expect much changes, say, obviously tonight, I don't expect any, and Monday when they play in Toronto, and then they're off for the 5 days for the Christmas break. But it's something that I think that the team is going to have to, figure out an answer to, whether or not that answer comes, in the month of January or it comes after the Four Nations Cup, the significant break there. I'm not sure, but I do think that, the current method of, draw penalty, hope for power play, succeed on power play, you try and hold your water at 5-on-5 is not a recipe for long-term success. When we come back this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, the Jets are in action tonight against their rival Minnesota Wild, a Wild team that is equally struggling as of late. They're banged up a little bit, and they played last night. So we delve deep into tonight's Jets-Wild game in downtown Winnipeg. Ezra Ginsburg's in the top right. That's unusual. Connor Rabchuk's in the bottom middle. I'm your host, Drew Mandel. This is the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now. Saturday morning, welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mandel, Ezra Ginsburg, Connor Rabchuk with you. We're all about the Winnipeg Jets. Jets in the Wild later on tonight, the Illegal Curve post-game show. Okay, so let me do some math. I got to figure out time zones here. The game's at 6:10 Central Time, which means post game in Winnipeg is going to be about 8:45 Central. I add a 1 there. Okay, 9:45 Eastern, 8:45 Central. That's when the Illegal Curve post game show will begin, following the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild.
I thought you were about to pull out an abacus, Drew.
You know what? Fortunately, I have enough fingers and toes left, even though my hands might be a bit frostbitten right now, to be able to do that simple math. But
Connor, frostbitten as he's got the beautiful Kentucky woods in the background. No snow. Must be nice.
It's not warm though. I mean, I'm telling you, it's not. It's below zero. I think.
What is it in Fahrenheit? Like 40?
No, it's not 40. If it was 40, I'd be in shorts and a t-shirt. It's about 30 degrees in Fahrenheit right now. So,
well, I have really trouble with my Fahrenheit conversion.
Well,
so
that means 0 is 32. So you can assume that it's right around freezing. There's just no snow as it happens. But anyways, I'm here. I'm trooping it through.
What do you have on for footwear? I bet you still have sandals on.
I do not. I'm not Dave Minuk walking into the various arenas, wearing sandals when it's 10 below and shorts and everything else like Kelly Moore of CJLB likes to rib him about. I'm wearing proper footwear for the climate. Don't worry about that. But anyways, Connor and I will be back later on tonight, the Illegal Curve post-game show presented by Play Now. Talk about the Jets and the Wild. Golden opportunity for the Winnipeg Jets. As you mentioned, you're right, the Wild, they're a great road team. 12-2-1 is what I think I looked up to see what their road record was.
Well, that's got to be the best road record in the NHL this year. Like, I don't know how you could have two losses.
12-2-3 is their road record, which is, you would assume that. Hang on, I'll check right now if that's league best. I can do multiple things at once.
If it's not league best, it's got to be top 2. I would be shocked if it wasn't top 2.
Yeah, it's certainly only having 2 losses on the road looks like that's the best in the league right now at quick glance. So so it's going to be a good game. Now the Jets, of course, like I said, second half of a back-to-back for the Minnesota Wild. Jesper Wallstedt is going to be the goaltender of record for the Wild. They're without Gustafsson. He's been out of the lineup, I think, for the last 4 games, if I'm not mistaken. And Marc-Andre Fleury got the game last night. This is an opportunity for the Winnipeg Jets to take advantage of what should be a bit of a tired opponent and get back to feeling good about themselves after that really disappointing, putting it mildly, performance on Wednesday night in Anaheim. The Jets flew back on Thursday. They had a good practice yesterday. They should be well rested and more energetic to go up against the Minnesota Wild, and everyone knows that the Minnesota Wild really begin and end with Kirill Kaprizov.
Yeah, 100%. And, just going back to Jesper Wallstedt for a second, he's obviously the goalie of the future for the Wild. We know that this is Fleury's last year.
Former first-round pick of the Wild, I think in 21, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was the Chaz Lucius year, 20th overall. Interestingly, his numbers aren't very good for the Iowa Wild. Obviously,
no,
I'm not going to be able to break down the Iowa Wild. Dave would be able to speak to that a little bit better.
Actually, the Hrabchuk horse minute is gonna happen later on in the show. No Minuk Moose minute, but the Hrabchuk horse minute.
I like it. Yeah, that could be the beginning of a beautiful segment. But so Jesper Wallstedt. This is only his second start of the year. He played a few games last year for the Wild, but obviously, this is, a big game for him. So he's going to want to step up. But also, I think, you're going to hear, we're not obviously going to hear ourselves, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets coaching staff is saying, okay, guys, let's get some rubber on this guy early, especially considering, like we talked about, the troubles that the Jets have had with generating good shot quality or shots at all against Anaheim or San Jose, or going back previous to those games. The Jets have had spurts, or I know Spency doesn't want me to use the word spurts, but they've had, let's say, big chunks of games where the offense has dried up and the Jets don't register a shot on net. So that's just something to factor in, that Wallstedt, this is only his 5th NHL start ever. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Drew. I mean, Kirill Kaprizov is obviously, one of the best offensive players in the league. And I think there's some similarities, guys, to between what the Jets are going through and what the Wild are going through, just in terms of Ehlers obviously missed 9 games. Joel Eriksson Ek, I think this is his 8th or 9th game that he's missed. Obviously, he's a top center for the Wild. So they've got Freddie Gaudreau right now centering that second line with Marcus Johansson and Matt Boldy. And then, of course, your top line is Kaprizov, Rossi, and Marco Rossi, that is former first-round pick, and Matt Zuccarello. So, I mean, they're missing I know they've been having some trouble scoring goals lately. So obviously Eriksson Ek not as prolific offensively as Kirill Kaprizov, but still, this is a guy that had a career year last year with, what did he have, 64, 65 points, 30 goals, right? So Eriksson Ek is a key player, so that's a big advantage for the Jets that he's not in the lineup. But the Wild are a scrappy team, and these games are always close. I mean, they're rarely blowouts. We know that the Wild have players that can get under the Jets' skin. That's not just talking about Ryan Hartman or Marcus Foligno. They have other guys that can get in under the skin. So it's the type of game where, you know, the Jets are going to have to come out with a much better start, and obviously you're going to want to see waves of attack that you have not seen. And I think it goes back to what Connor was saying with how poor those underlying advanced stats have been with generating offense through the slot, off the rush. It's a perfect opportunity, I think, here for the Jets to get this going. They need to reset. They have to flush those games in California, and they have to reset and come out with a big performance tonight against Minnesota.
No question. I would agree with what Ezzy said there, Connor. It's also worth noting, even though as we talk about the Jets' struggles at 5-on-5, the Minnesota Wild have the 30th ranked penalty kill in the entire NHL. So you want to see a better performance at 5-on-5, but opportunity does present itself when it comes to the special teams because of how good the Jets' power play has been. I mean, look, you don't want the power play to start struggling just to say, I told you so, that you can't be power play dependent. And based on Minnesota's penalty kill and a rookie goaltender who hasn't had the great numbers, would not be a surprise to see success in that aspect of the game tonight.
100%. And yeah, I mean, you can't fault the Jets for having a good power play and the best goalie in the league, right? Like those are parts of hockey that they are the best at. Yes, exactly. And it all speaks to the sustainability of it. I mean, we talked all year last year, they were the best 5-on-5 team, and we thought that would be sustainable in the playoffs, but then Colorado's power play clicked along at like 50% in the first round, so it didn't really matter. It all falls under the same umbrella, right? Of the sustainability and the power play and the goaltending. But yes, you want to see more 5-on-5 chances. Of course, I want to see the Jets score on the power play if Minnesota's penalty kill is 30th. And I know Minnesota as well has really struggled with chance generation. A lot of these stats that I search up and see the Jets near the bottom of the last 18 games or whatever, the Minnesota Wild are down there as well. And they've kind of struggled of late, as he brought up their sort of recent losing ways. Last night, only scoring one goal against the Utah Hockey Club at home. That's concerning. And then Jacob Middleton, I think that loss for the Wild can be kind of attributed a lot to the Dylan Samberg one for the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, Samberg's been out a long time. But just a quick search here. The Jake Middleton Brock Faber pairing outscored their opponents 23-8 at 5-on-5 this season. So that, which is the best pairing in the NHL by just goals percentage, right? So they were the best pairing in the NHL, and they lose Middleton, and Faber obviously is still there, and he's still a rock solid top pair defenseman. But that's a huge loss, and the Jets should be able to not only generate at 5-on-5, but yes, Middleton's a great penalty killer as well. So generate on the power play and hopefully take advantage of a rookie goaltender.
Well, the Jets are, again, it seems like they're catching the Minnesota Wild in a decent point in time where the Wild have been struggling. You read their post-game quotes last night. Marcus Foligno was talking about, oh, look, we know this. This isn't anything overwhelmingly insightful. It's that 82 games is a long season, and you're not going to be playing at a 900 winning percentage or a 900 point percentage for all 82 games. So the Wild, who have had an incredible start to the year. Let's not get carried away. The fact that they are, neck and neck with the Winnipeg Jets speaks to how great both teams have been. But maybe when the Jets are sort of going through a little bit of a doldrum, so are the Wild right now. They're going through a little bit of a struggle. They're trying to find a way to get back to the success that they had earlier this year. I see our buddy Michael Russo mentioned last night, 14 straight periods that Kirill Kaprizov has not been on the ice for a Wild goal. So that's, always, that's more than 4 games, almost 5 games worth of action where Kaprizov has not been on the ice and the Wild have scored, which is really surprising because we know that he is their best player, certainly their offensive driver, one of the best players in the league, a guy who was talked about as the MVP, early in this season, even though it should always go to Connor Hellebuyck, by the way. It's, you can see the parallels, I would say, between the Jets and their success, then their struggles, and the Wild and their success and their struggles. Now it's a matter of, are the Wild still in their struggles tonight? Are the Jets back to playing better, or is it going to be a sort of a continuation of both? But that's obviously what we'll talk about later on tonight on the post game show. But just from that perspective, the Jets seem to be catching the Wild in a pretty decent time point, Ezzy.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like over the years, the Jets seem to get the Wild often on the second game of a back-to-back.
Yeah, the proximity between the two, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Connor makes a good point, right? Like in terms of their offense struggling, and last night, losing to 2-1 to the Utah Hockey Club. Obviously, Utah's improved from last year, but this Wild team is in a similar slide to the Jets. And I think, guys, part of it has to do with the time of year, right? Like, these guys don't want to admit it, but these guys are already starting to think about their hot vacations that are coming up, right? Like, we know that they don't want to admit it. And I think, team staff as well, but the players specifically, I think some of them are dealing with injuries. They might not be at 100%, right? But they're just trying to get these last few games in. So I think, that's something just to take note of. But
the 5-day break that starts for the Jets on Monday at 5 o'clock,
right?
They're going to enjoy those few days off the ice, get with family, get away from the grind of it all. And all these teams, I mean, look, again, the NHL season is too long, the NBA season is too long, the Major League Baseball season is too long. It's not going to change. So the result is that all these teams are going to have these instances where they just go through struggles, and the struggles last a week or 2 weeks. If you're a bad team, they last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. If you're a really bad team, they last 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I mean, it's just unfortunately the nature of the beast, and it's just a matter of how quickly you can dig yourself out of those struggles, Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing, or another big thing, is the injuries. The injury bug is kind of caught up to the Central Division as of late. I brought up the Dylan Sandberg. We all know Nikolai Ehlers was out as well. Jake Middleton, Joel Eriksson-Ek for the Wild. You look at Dallas. I mean, they lost Tyler Seguin for a long time. Thomas Harley's day-to-day. Mason Marchment's day-to-day. Matt Dumba's on IR. Like a lot of the Central Division teams. And then Colorado just has their injuries came in the first week of the season.
Or the Heiskanen was fortunate to avoid injury after that. I mean, Matt Rempe is just such a stupid hit. I don't know if you saw it last night, or if the people in the chat saw it last night.
I didn't see it yet. I'll pull it up.
Heiskanen has his, Rempe targets Heiskanen. He sees his numbers, and he leaves his feet and drives Heiskanen head first, elbow first into the glass. It's just a dumb hit by a guy who should know better, but he doesn't because he's a dumb player. I mean, he's a dirty guy who's going to get eventually. His suspensions are going to catch up to him.
Yeah, I mean,
you saw it, Connor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, no, that Heiskanen was lucky to avoid injury, and I know concussions can be weird, and he got hit in the head, so we'll see. Hopefully, he is okay. But yeah, that's an incredibly dirty hit. I mean, he leaves his feet, the elbow's right to the head. He got 5 for elbowing and a game misconduct, as he should. And we can
might get more, right?
Yeah,
he should get supplemental.
I just watched it, by the way, Connor. Yeah. That's I mean, that's an obvious 5-game major and misconduct, and it's just a terrible. Like, first off, it's from behind.
Yes.
And he drives his head into the glass. Right.
I mean,
like, so it's just
pick your penalty. Pick charging, pick boarding.
Yeah, that should be at least 1 or 2 games. I think we'd all agree we won't be surprised if it's a 1 or 2 game suspension. But yeah, I think to Connor's point, it goes back to kind of what I was saying about this time of year, right? Teams are dealing with injuries, but also guys that are just banged up, bruised up, not feeling 100%. And I think a lot of it has to do with the condensed schedule, right? Like, it's a condensed schedule this year with the 4 Nations tournament. So this is a great opportunity, guys. Like,
condensed the schedule is. Sorry, Ezzy. I apologize for so the Jets definitely went through their stretch of condensed schedule. But if you look at their schedule from now until the end of the regular season, it's not bad. It's really not that bad. There's only a few back-to-backs left. It's not. I think there's one stretch of maybe 4 and 6 when they head out east to New York and Philly and New Jersey. I think that's in March, if I'm not mistaken. They got through the grind of their schedule, and I would say from here on out, I would describe it as a typical and normal NHL schedule. I don't know. I think other teams are going to find that they get what the Jets had, particularly in November and early in December with the schedule. But I think for the Jets from here on out, it is more what I would describe as normal.
Yeah, that's good. I
Yes.
mean, you can't continue having 16 or 17 games a month, right, guys? Like these 3 and 4 nights, or 6 games in 10 days, that type of thing. It impacts these guys' health, right? Like it's been proven that the more games that you have in a shorter amount of time, it's going to result in more injuries. I mean, it makes sense. It's pretty obvious to everyone, but just going back to this game tonight, I'm definitely really looking forward to it, because it's, again, as opposed to the last the last time I should say these teams played, they're both going down as opposed to going up, right? Like they're still both atop the Central Division. The Wild are 3 points back, I still think they have a game in hand, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, this is a big one, and it's an opportunity, I think, for the Jets to along with the game against the Leafs, but to go into the break feeling better about their game. I mean, that's Captain Obvious speaking, but there's a lot to be desired the way the Jets have been playing 5-on-5. Look no further than the game against the Ducks. So we know the Jets and the Wild usually bring the best out in each other, right? Similar to a legal curve, especially when Connor Harabchek's on the show. But I mean, so these games are usually tight. They're usually hotly contested, tight checking. There's usually, I wouldn't be surprised if, maybe a few guys drop the gloves at some point, just getting in the holiday spirit, right? But I definitely think the Jets know that they have to come out with a better effort in front of their home crowd based on how that little mini road trip ended.
And it's a big opportunity for the Jets too. I remember saying they had that home and home against the Florida Panthers, and they lost 5-0 on the Saturday. Yeah. I remember the WST Sunday Live the next morning. Jacob Stoller had a really good point that in the playoffs, everyone wants to make everything about the playoffs, so let's do it. The Jets, the last 2 years, have won the first game and then lost 4 straight, right? So that's showing the ability to bounce back from a loss, which they haven't been able to do in the playoffs the last 2 years against the defending Stanley Cup champions, was a big thing at the moment. And they're not in a home and home against the Minnesota Wild, but this is still a really big opportunity for Scott O'Neill, the Jets coaching staff, the players, to bounce back against a playoff opponent. Yes, the Wild are banged up, and you could put all these asterisks on it, but you have to play the opponent in front of you. The Wild are atop the Central Division in the Western Conference with you. You're coming off of a brutal loss to the Anaheim Ducks, where you had 4 shots on goal through the first 15 minutes or 20 minutes of that game, right?
You had 8 shots on goal through the first 40 minutes.
Yeah, so
it's incredibly
this is
bad.
A huge opportunity for the Jets or Jets team, I should say, to bounce back against a playoff opponent and kind of show that ability to play in a big game Saturday night at home. Like, they got to show up for this game. You got to get
Connor. I'm kind of hoping that the Jets wallop the Wild just so it completely erases the memory of that Ducks game. Like that Ducks Jets game was so bad that, like, it honestly, I think it might have traumatized me a little bit how bad the Jets played in that game. So I think that the Jets need, the Jets ideally don't want to win this game 3-2. Like, they want to win this game like 6-2.
They'll take a win any which way they
no,
can.
I'm just saying. I'm saying more so for the fans. Do it for the fans. No, obviously, I'm joking here. I'm just saying that, to Connor's point, the performance against the Ducks was so bad. Like, we talked about it on the post-game show, Drew, which Connor graciously listened to, even though it was a late one. And shout out to Kenny and Rennie, who are also doing late night duties, and everybody who joined us on Wednesday night. But I mean, that performance is just unacceptable, even if it's the second game of a back-to-back, because you had Ehlers in, who was fresh. You had Ville Heinola, who was in fresh. And maybe, Drew, I don't know if you want to get into that quickly before we go to break, or you want to get into the news, because Connor was at practice. So, I mean, nobody better than Connor to throw to here.
So Logan Stanley, sorry, I'll give you the quick rundown, and then you can jump in. Logan Stanley is going to miss the next 2 games after blocking that shot on the road trip, and so he's out of the lineup, which means you're going to have Ville Heinola on the left side with Colin Miller on the right side, which is sort of what people have been clamoring for to get it's a short runway, I suppose, only of a couple games, but at least you're now going to see an opportunity with Ville Heinola playing on the right side, the proper side that he's used to playing on, as opposed to having him on the wrong side, and at least sort of run with that. But there was also maybe was there a bit of a rotation between Hayden Fleury and Heinola on the left side? I sort of saw something along those, but we're expecting still Fleury to be with Pionk for the most part.
Yes, and they ran a drill where they only have 6 healthy defensemen up with the team right now, so they were kind of rotating. Morrissey, DeMello, and Pionk were rotating, and then the other 3, Fleury, Heinola, and Miller, were rotating. But I am expecting Morrissey, DeMello, Fleury, Pionk, and Heinola Miller. And I'm excited to see Heinola Miller because I think the best 2 games that Ville Heinola has played this year was with Colin Miller, and it was the first 2 games back where he should have been super rusty and all this stuff coming off of the injury. And I thought those were his best 2 games, and they can both move the puck. And I think they can be a good, transition, move the puck up third pair. So I'm excited to see that. And I know a lot of Jets fans are as well. Of course, it comes at the expense of Logan Stanley, who's out for the next 2 games. And Dylan Sandberg is apparently the plan. He seems very tentative, but the plan is for him to start skating on December 27th. And the Jets need Dylan Sandberg back in the worst way.
Right. So December 27th, starting to skate. I mean, that is, again, that's his first time back on the ice. You're looking at a couple weeks, from that year. Again, the timeline hasn't changed. You're looking at mid-January, somewhere around there, to get him up to speed. And
but Drew, when it comes to Dylan Sandberg news, I agree with Connor. I would just be excited to hear that Dylan Sandberg is doing anything right now. It's just good. Any news is good news, right? So it's good. Right. He's still a couple of weeks away. You're right.
You got to temper your expectations, though. He's got to come back. He's got to. First of all, is he 100% healthy, or is that the kind of 100% health doesn't come until the off season, and he'll play through it, and which of course they all do. All these guys are playing through something. We remember wasn't Neil Pionk playing through a broken foot, for a couple of years, it seemed like, so. But you're right. The idea of getting Dylan Sandberg back there just solidifies everything on the back end, and calms the waters. And you're right. The Jets have 6 healthy defensemen. That's all they have, and they don't have an immediate option at the AHL level right now because, as Manuk, as Pacific Ocean Manuk would say, Sal Monson's out the lineup still down there with having suffered that injury a couple weeks ago in that game.
Yeah, I mean, and Dylan Coghlan, we should mention. I'm not going to do a Ginsburg Moose minute here, boys. But Dylan Coghlan scored a goal yesterday. The Manitoba Moose won, so good to see the Moose. They snapped their losing streak. But yeah, I think to Connor's point about Heinola and Miller, that's why. And I mean, we've been talking about this ad nauseum on the Saturday morning show and the post game shows. But Heinola and Miller, to me, with Logan Stanley healthy, I think is your obvious kind of third pair at this point. And yes, that would leave Hayden Fleury as your 7th defenseman, but that's what I would be proposing, right? Like if I was Jacob Stoller and I was writing my next piece for sportsnet.ca, I would be talking about that.
You got to tell Connor Rabchuk to write it for illegalcurve.com
or Connor for illegalcurve.com. But Connor's smart enough. I don't have to tell him what to write about.
That's a bit of a shade at Jacob.
I guess I'm saying Jacob's. Jacob's
wow,
a smart guy.
Ginsburg.
Jacob's a smart guy.
The holiday season usually brings joy and peace to one and all.
I was trying to elevate Connor there a little bit, but no, I mean obviously Jacob Stoller is a really talented writer. Check out all of his stuff on sportsnet.ca. Also check out all of Connor's work on illegalcurve.com, and also check out Winnipeg Sports Talk Sunday Live, and also anytime Connor's on Winnipeg Sports Talk. So got to get that in there. But
you're really great at your program.
No, I mean this is I think the ideal top 6 you want when Sandberg's back, right? Sandberg and Pionk is your second pair. I mean, I know there's some people that feel like Pionk and Morrissey are better, and then you have DeMello with Sandberg, but the underlying numbers, guys, were really good for Sandberg and Pionk, so I like that second pair. And I think Heinola and Miller, Sandberg
over
is
Fleury back, at this point, over Fleury and Miller.
Yes.
Really? So
yes.
when they're all healthy, you think it's going to be Heinola that eventually wins that job over.
But Drew, let's not forget though, if you go back to training camp, nobody was saying that Hayden Fleury should be above Ville Heinola as the third pair. This was the year that Ville Heinola was finally had that with Brendan Dillon gone. Ville Heinola finally had his opportunity on the left side. So I don't think at this point in his career, you want to see Ville Heinola, in the press box for an extended.
I agree with you, but right now, I would say in terms of who's more reliable or who's probably got the inside track on that third pairing left side job when everyone's healthy, Hayden Fleury has outperformed everybody else on that left side, I would say, Connor, which means Logan Stanley, of course, is still going to get the job for whatever reason. But right now, Hayden Fleury has been the more reliable of the left side defensemen.
Yeah, I agree. And Ville Heinola has had his struggles as well, as has Logan Stanley. But I think the biggest shocking part of all of this to me is Colin Miller. I mean, this guy was
I agree.
an absolute rock on the third pair for the first, 24, 25 games of the season. And now he's become this rotational guy with Ville Heinola, who's very clearly struggling. And Logan Stanley has the penciled in. You can write him in pen on that third pair. Like I don't really understand why Colin Miller is a rotational guy. He's
right.
very,
I agree.
In my opinion, he was very clearly the number 5 on the Winnipeg Jets when it was Samberg, Pionk, Morrissey DeMello, Colin Miller, and whoever you want. He was very clearly a step above everyone else kind of in that conversation on the third pair. And it's kind of baffling to me that he's become this rotational piece.
Yeah. And I mean, I've already mentioned, Connor, I agree with you because I was saying that on the post-game show and on the Saturday morning show. And obviously, guys, like the coaching staff has their reasons why Logan Stanley was in the lineup and they had Heinola on his offside, right? Obviously, we can all agree the offside thing is not working. Ville Heinola is better on the left side. And hopefully,
I don't know, why they would have expected that it would be working, though. I mean, it's unfair for a guy who's barely played any hockey for the last year, given the injuries. Okay, here you go. We're going to give you some runway. I mean, these are just the words that Scott Arniel himself said. I mean, I'm not making up these quotes. I'm paraphrasing, so they're not direct quotes. But, we're going to give, we have a lot of time for Heinola. We think he's going to be great. We're going to give him a lot of runway. Oh, by the way, you're going to do that runway on the right side where you really haven't had any minutes and haven't had much experience, barring a few games here and there in the AHL. Yeah. And we think you're going to be able to succeed. I mean, it just seems like you're tying up one hand behind his back in terms of success.
Well, I would agree with that. And I think, what the issue here is, guys, is that the third pair was looking like pretty steady earlier in the season, right? Connor mentioned it. Like when it was Hayden Fleury and Colin Miller, that pair was pretty steady for third pair, right? Like they get their 12, 14, 15 minutes, and you just want to make sure that they're moving the puck nicely out of their zone, not turning the puck over, just doing their defensive responsibilities. And then what you've seen over the last, 12 to 15 games is you've seen this rotation, and Colin Miller, to Connor's point, is the guy that probably shouldn't be the one rotating, right? And so for me, Drew, the reason why I say Ville Heinola over Hayden Fleury once Samberg is back is more so because of I think he deserves that opportunity at this point, not necessarily based on the way he's playing, because I agree with Connor. Heinola is struggling a little bit. He's struggling a little bit in his own zone. He's struggling on his reads. I mean, let's be honest, the Jets as a whole, have been having their issues, but I think, the biggest issue for me is that with Samberg out, and why you've seen how important Samberg is to the Jets lineup is that the second pair has been struggling. And when your second pair is struggling and your third pair is struggling, well, now you have a big issue. And that's my biggest issue with when you have Hayden Fleury in an elevated role and he hasn't performed like the way that you would want to. It's affected Neil Pionk as well. So, again, we're going to see Heinola and Miller on that third pair. I think, the results will be better. And, hopefully, we'll see more out of a better showing out of Heinola, because as Connor reported yesterday, Logan Stanley is going to miss the next 2 games. So there's not going to be any question marks in that game against Toronto, unless there's an injury and maybe Dylan Coghlan gets called up, boys. I don't know. But we're going to see Heinola and Miller for at least the next 2.
And just real quick, last thing on these pairings is I think the highest ceiling of the Jets' third pair is Colin Miller and either Fleury or Heinola. I don't know what the ceiling is for Logan Stanley and then Ville Heinola on his offside. I really don't.
I don't think it's anything. I think there's only a floor. Ceiling at best.
There's a floor.
Yes,
there's no ceiling.
The floor is quite low. The ceiling, I'm not sure. I don't think we've seen it, and I don't think we will see it because Logan Stanley has had his struggles that we've well documented. But yeah, Ville Heinola on his offside, those two clearly don't really work well together. I think Ville Heinola and Colin Miller are going to have a really strong game tonight. And I think that that's the best option for the Jets' third pair until Dylan Samberg returns. Then you can talk about Heinola versus Fleury. But yeah, yeah.
Look who's sliding into the chat right now, Connor. Look at that.
Yeah, your WST colleague. Exactly right. Yes. You guys will be on tomorrow morning
Yes,
9
we
a.m.
will.
Central. And you'll talk about the Jets and the Minnesota Wild, and I'm sure everything else to do with the Winnipeg Jets. That's on WST Sunday morning live. We'll go to break. Hour number 2 of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show will be up next. Want to talk about Blake Wheeler and his recent comments that have made some news about his leadership style and his attempted to adjust that and the impact that had on the Winnipeg Jets. Much more to come. Drew Mindell, Ezra Ginsburg, Connor Rabchuk with you on a Saturday morning. It's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show presented by Play Now. It rolls on. Don't go anywhere.
We want to thank you for not betting with Play Now and choosing our illegal gambling site instead.
Because we couldn't afford things like this without your money.
So much of your money.
Now you might have questions like,
Do our profits benefit your community?
No.
or bet with Play Now, Manitoba's local legal and secure gambling site.
Dining, entertainment, parking, and convenience, all in one spot. City Place is located in the heart of downtown Winnipeg, attached to the Canada Life Centre. Whether you're working, living, or out for a night in the downtown, make City Place your go-to destination before or after the fun finds you. Lunchtime, game time, anytime, visit City Place at 333 St. Mary Avenue, next to Canada Life Centre. Holt Dental, the new official dentist of Illegal Curve, has a philosophy rooted in 2 unyielding principles: genuinely caring about patients and providing outstanding service. Being a patient of Holt Dental means more than just checkups and treatments. It's taking the time to listen and talk to each patient so they can achieve the best long-term health, functionality, and aesthetics for their teeth, mouth, and gums. Conveniently located at Grant Park Festival on Taylor Avenue, Holt Dental is dentistry of the highest quality in a comfortable and relaxed environment. For more information, visit holtdental.ca. Oh, and there's plenty of free parking at the front door, too.
Oh, we're back.
Oh, we're back. I think I hit
We're
the button
back.
by mistake, to be honest with you. Hang on.
We're back.
You talk, Connor.
It's a live show. It's a live show.
Yeah.
I just want to say, well, if you're giving me the floor, I want to
Give
say
the
that I
floor.
know a lot of people here are going to the game tonight as a part of the WST ticket pack. I'm excited to see everyone before the game. A few of you who I've met in chat here. I think at the Michelob Ultra fan deck tonight. But yes, excited for the game tonight and to see all the people who are here supporting Illegal Curve and obviously WSTers as well.
Are we going to see Huss having any Michelob Ultras? Because I know he's more of a Bud Light guy, but
Maybe, yeah.
I'm
There's
sure
only one way to find out.
he'll make sacrifices as necessary. I'll be honest. I ended the commercials too soon there. I pressed the button by accident.
I
as
was going to
coming-
say, I go from my basement here upstairs to grab some more coffee, and then I came back and I was like, I thought I still had like 30 seconds.
You did, and so I have to apologize to our friends at Boston Pizza. I think I cut off their commercial a little bit too soon there, so I do apologize to them. We're going to be at Boston Pizza a whole bunch coming up in January and February, and then in March for some watch parties. So we'll have more details on that coming up soon. But we're really looking forward. We nailed down the schedule for Boston Pizza upcoming for the for the 2025 portion of the season. So we're
Connor
looking
Drew was
forward
like,
to that.
okay, I'm going to have spaghetti and meatballs for this game, and then I'm going to have the pierogi pizza for this game, and then Taste of Italy over here.
Yeah, it's what can I say? I enjoy my food. I don't think I need to apologize for that. I've got to tell you, my hands are freezing, as you can see. So that's why I've gotten jammed into my hoodie here. My
Dude,
hands
there's something wrong with this. Like you're a Manitoban, you're a proud Winnipegger in Kentucky.
Yeah, but I don't go outside without gloves on in Winnipeg. I mean,
but you're like it's still like a good 30 degrees warmer there. Have
know,
you checked the temperature in Winnipeg? It's frigid outside right now.
Yes, I don't doubt that. But again, I'm not dressed properly. I don't have gloves. If I had gloves, I'd be fine. The only part of my body that's particularly cold right now is my hands. And again, this is probably too much
Get
information.
Laura to pass you some mini mitts or something.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any mini mitts. I'm not sure what's going on with the mini mitt situation. But I also have a tendency, and I think my father also has this, that we just get our hands get very cold. Like we have like poor blood flow to our hands, and of all the body, like in winter, all the body parts of mine that get cold, it's my hands that get cold the fastest. So I'm apparently forgot about that briefly, and now I'm experiencing it as I'm sitting out here broadcasting on this Saturday morning.
Can I go on a bit of a rant here? Like, sorry, I
Is
know
it
we want
about is it about weather or my cold
no, it's
hands?
it's about yes. Well, it's not your cold hands specifically, Drew, but
Okay.
it's about people not dressing appropriately for this weather. Like, and sorry, and I know you want to get to Blake Wheeler's comments here, and then we've got Jesse Pierce coming up in about 20 minutes here.
Yeah,
But
I will, just so you guys know, I'm gonna have to bail out in about the 20-minute mark. So you guys will interview Jesse and drive the show home yourselves for the last 30 minutes or so.
yeah, that sounds good. We've been wanting to get rid of you anyways, Drew.
Totally understand.
But my rant is more so you see people, and obviously, Drew, both of our kids go to the same school. So I see people all the time, parents going in with their kids not wearing gloves or a toque. And I realize that you're going in just from your car to the school. But I'll never understand why people that have lived here for either their entire life or most of their life, and it's minus 30 outside, and just people aren't wearing gloves. I just don't understand that. It's like, your hands are going to get frozen. And like, is it comfort? Like, is it people that just don't want to wear, like, I just don't understand it. I see people all the time walking down the street and they don't have gloves on when it's minus 30. I don't get it. Just go to Dollarama and get yourself a $5 pair of gloves. I just don't. Anyways, that's my rant.
Okay.
And you don't even have to have lived here your whole life. You just need one day.
Yeah,
Just need one day
exactly.
Like,
Exactly. Like, it's not like, and that's the thing. It's not like it's an expensive thing to get. Like I said,
No.
you can go to Dollarama and there's cheap gloves there. It's I don't know. I find it funny that people think that they can get away with it, and then they're like, just don't subject yourself to that, right? Like, just get a good pair of gloves, get a good toque, maybe a scarf.
Hang on. When you were a teenager, when you were a rebellious teenager, did you dress appropriately?
Always.
Really? I don't believe that for 1 second.
Drew, I wasn't a rebellious teenager. I was a very
studious.
very
Sorry, studious is the word.
studious.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Disciplined.
yeah, disciplined,
Yeah.
obedient.
That's
Yeah, I
right.
was
Yeah.
definitely not obedient ever at any point in my life.
That's part of your charm there, Mr. Ginsburg, though. We appreciate that. Blake Wheeler's comments. So they made a splash. I saw them first. I think Elliot Friedman tweeted out a link to it. And thankfully, other people watched the entire video, because TLDR, I'm not spending 90 minutes on that. But, Kenny Weeb wrote about it. Other people have written about it. I just, to me, while insightful, I did think that it was a little sort of self-serving, some of the comments. I thought they were insightful, and I thought that, yes, this is a person who, in hindsight, realizes that he made errors, but at the same time, it's easy to look back at things of that, after the fact. And in the immediacy of it, I still don't get the sense that he realizes some of the, I'm going to use the word damage, that he caused by being so singularly focused, maybe self-centered, Yeah, and I understand that he thought that that's how he had to succeed. So I don't know that he was necessarily aware that he was being malicious, but I did think that, they rang a little hollow to me.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I haven't watched or listened to the full interview either, so I've just read about it, and I think Mike and Kenny had a piece, right?
Yeah, they did.
In today's Free Press, or I forget if it was today's or yesterday's, but regardless, you should go check that out if you're interested in this. I see what you're saying, Drew. Like, I'm just reading some of the comments from Blake Wheeler, and like this comment about losing the captaincy, embarrassed probably doesn't do justice how I felt. I remember the first time I went out for our first game of the season and I didn't have the C on my jersey anymore. That was a bad feeling. I felt humiliated. I felt like everyone was staring at me. Like, first off, he's being very honest there.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty.
But also he's looking at it from a singular perspective.
Yeah.
Which you could say, well, obviously he's going to look at it.
What did he
from his
deserve?
own
What did he
perspective.
do to deserve to keep the captaincy?
I can tell you, without a question, that the culture of the team improved when they switched from Blake Wheeler to Adam Lowry as a captain. Everybody who has watched the team, or like us, we covered the team, or you talk to people within the organization, there was a problem with the culture, and it started with Blake Wheeler, and that is a fact, right? Like this is, and Blake Wheeler's not here anymore. So, maybe, when Blake Wheeler was here, we had to be a little bit more careful with what we said because, you didn't want to ruffle too many feathers within the organization in terms of, how he was perceived. But as we know, guys, perception is reality. And Blake Wheeler was a guy who was too hard on his teammates. Like, let's be honest here. That was the biggest criticism of Blake Wheeler, and everything had to be done the Blake Wheeler way, right? And I think, look at the last 3 years of the Jets under this Rick Bowness, Scott Arniel regime. I mean, it's been a breath of fresh air. It's like covering a different team, right? Like, obviously the Jets had the 110-point season and the 15-1 start, so that helps as well, right, guys? But yeah, like hearing these comments and specifically the one that I just read, him talking about losing the captaincy. I mean, everybody kind of agreed, guys, at the time. I'm not talking about the team because they obviously made the decision, but Connor, I think most Jets fans agreed when Blake Wheeler was stripped of his captaincy, it was time. It wasn't like there was this like 50%, on the Wheeler side, 50% on, like I think, the Blake Wheeler as captain show had come to an end, and you could argue that it probably should have come to an end a year or two earlier.
Yeah, and excuse me. And I think a big reason why they brought in Rick Bowness as well, and one thing that Rick Bowness said at his retirement press conference was he was brought in to change the culture, obviously make the playoffs and win games, and he did that twice. But he was brought in to change the culture, and that was a massive kind of fracture in the Jets at that point, and bringing in the accountability. And it read to me like Blake Wheeler was holding his teammates accountable, like you said, Ezzy, and the wrong ways. And he wanted to do it the Blake Wheeler way and was very stuck in his ways. And that's how I interpreted it. And then when you add in the full timeline of bringing in Rick Bowness, immediately stripping Blake Wheeler of the captaincy, and then eventually having Adam Lowry take over, I think it all just paints a picture that clearly the teammates within the Jets room did not respond well to whatever leadership tactics maybe Wheeler developed near the end there, because he was the captain for a long time. And the first couple of years, I mean, I didn't follow this team as closely back in the first couple of years of his captaincy. But so I can't really speak to that. But the last couple of years, I agree, Ezzy. It didn't seem like half the fan base or half the media pundits were saying, whoa, where did this come from? It felt as though it was time and almost expected after they brought in Rick Bowness.
I'll give Wheeler credit because it sounds like he on his own volition went out and dealt, tried to get a leadership coach to sort of find out how he can be a better leader. I think the unfortunate part is that the timing of that was probably a little bit too late. The damage had already been done. And I'll say that the organization deserves some blame, and maybe it's something all organizations should begin to consider. When you appoint a captain, maybe you appoint that captain and you get that individual a leadership coach immediately to find out, hiring a leadership coach 3 years or 4 years or however many years after that person has already taken on a leadership role seems like you're doing things a little bit backwards. Well, they've been our leader and they've been doing it like this for 3 years, and only now do we realize that they've been doing it in a manner that doesn't really lead well. So let's go back and try and fix it. It's too little too late at that point. Maybe there's a lesson there for all NHL teams to take to heart, that with the captaincy comes a leadership coach for that captain or for your leadership group. Connor, I see like it looks like you're ready to get in on that.
Yes. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And that was one of the things that I had an article up here from Sportsnet that said that the leadership coach suggestions were to speak to some of the teammates who hadn't responded well to Wheeler's past leadership tactics to learn how he should act differently. And reading that paragraph, it just, what pops into my head is it's too little too late almost, right? Like, and someone brought up in chat a good point. He was the captain of the best or most successful team in the Jets history, since they've come back since 2011. And that does say something. But at what cost of the teammates that he maybe drove out of town, if we want to talk about Patrick Laine, right?
Well, I would say that his leadership at that point was what the team needed. But just because
Sure.
that's the leadership for 1 year, everybody grows, everybody develops, everybody changes, everybody's responsibilities change, everybody matures or immatures, as the case may be with a legal curve. But whatever it might be, just because you did it that way in year one doesn't mean you can do that. That's why coaches, add different wrinkles in training camp. You don't run the exact same training camp in your first year that you do in your second year. You change things up, you develop. And it sounds like it's unfortunate for Blake Wheeler is that his second year captaincy or his third year captaincy was not what was needed. And he had trouble understanding that what he was doing was not appropriate for the men that he was trying to lead. And I understand that can be a difficult phenomenon to wrap your brain around and a difficult concept to come to grips with, but to become embittered and angry and a bad teammate, I mean, you can probably say that he was a bad teammate for some of those individuals, is not what I would describe as good leadership. That's not leading in the way you want to lead. That's just going to create friction and divide, and you saw it in the dressing room. It wasn't a unified force.
Yeah, and just real quick, I mean, the most telling part of that, I'll always go back to this, was Game 6 against St. Louis. I mean, that game was Wednesday night against the Anaheim Ducks, and it was a playoff game. Yeah. And it was like your back was against the wall, and the Jets had like 10 shots through the first 50 minutes. Like it was clearly something needed to change, and the team wasn't responding to the leadership, whether that was at the time Paul Maurice, Blake Wheeler with the captaincy. That team had such high expectations that year, and ran into Jordan Binnington and the Red Hot Blues, who went on to win the Cup, of course. But that team should have been better. And with their backs against the wall in a must-win situation, their season on the line, they pulled a Wednesday night against the Anaheim Ducks. Like it wasn't a throwaway game, but they treated it like one.
And what was Wheeler's response? And what was Wheeler's response to the obvious question that was going to come to him right after the game? I mean, we don't need, family-friendly show and all. We all remember what he said to Paul Friesen, and I'm pretty sure Paul Friesen is okay with it. He can deal with that. But that, I think, just sort of goes to show the kind of leader that he had become. So, again, everybody in hindsight, it's easy in hindsight to look back and say, these are the mistakes I've made. This is how I failed in my opportunity. It's just unfortunate that in the moment, rather than being self-aware enough to rectify his errors, he became embittered and hardened, and I would argue a selfish leader rather than a selfless leader. And that's just, I mean, there's no need to relitigate history, but that's just sort of too bad that that's what happened.
I would agree with that, Drew. And I think this comment from Daryl Grenko is an interesting one. He says, what made Wheeler a great player on the ice made him a bad leader in the locker room. Because nobody, guys, is saying that Blake Wheeler was a bad hockey player. I mean, at his peak, we talk about that 2017-18 season a lot, right? He had back-to-back 91-point seasons. He was over a point a game in that run when the Jets lost to the Golden Knights in the West Final, right? Like he was a top 10, maybe top 5 right winger in his heyday, right? Guys, like nobody is diminishing what Blake Wheeler did for the Jets organization. That's not what's happening here. We're simply talking about him as a leader. And that was undeniable. I mean, I agree with Connor. I think, it kind of, if you want to say it kind of hit a climax. I know Drew's going to get creeped out by me saying that, but I think
not
that
just me.
when it really was exemplified during that first round loss to the Blues back in, I think that was 2019, right? I can't believe that was 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago. But again, I'm old. So when you talk about Wheeler, I think what happened was it kind of became, just a stale, stagnant message and culture. And it was coming. Blake Wheeler, I think almost you guys would probably agree, it almost became a situation where Blake Wheeler had too much power in that room. Like it became to that point where it was like,
I just don't.
You had to do it Blake Wheeler's way, and it became to the point where I think his message was getting stale, and the team needed. I think when Rick Bowness came in, and he stripped Wheeler of the captaincy, I mean that was the right decision. And I think, you know, and it's not just about wins and losses, right, guys? Because obviously, you know, hockey's a results business. We always talk about, oh, the Jets recently lost, the recency bias, right? They lost the recent game, or the Wild have lost, you know, 4 of their last 5 games. It's funny we're talking about Wheeler because obviously he's from Minnesota, and the Jets play the Wild tonight. But I think the point is that, first off, I think Jets fans like hearing from Blake Wheeler about this. I don't know, and again, I should mention, you know, Joe from Winnipeg, or pardon me, Kenny's water bottle had the comment up earlier. You know, we haven't listened to the whole thing, so yeah, we don't want to take, you know, 2 or 3 quotes out of context. But I think for the most part, we're getting, you know, the gist of the tone of the interview. He obviously wasn't happy with what happened in his last year in Winnipeg, and why would he be, right? Like, who would be happy with having the seeds stripped? But I think, to Drew's point, you got to show a little bit of humility and say, like, you know, that was the right thing for the team. It wasn't just about Blake Wheeler. At that time, the team needed, and also Wheeler was not the same player, right? Wheeler was not the 91-point player that he was, you know, 7 or 8 years ago. And so I think, to Drew's point, that's kind of just reading some of the comments. I will listen to it at some point, but he's not the most humble guy, Blake Wheeler.
Like, no, but you know, that makes, you know, I don't need him to be humble, because oftentimes the best athletes aren't humble. They are singularly focused on winning. And I'll give Blake Wheeler immense credit. He did absolutely everything he could do on the ice to help the Winnipeg Jets organization. So that should never be lost. This is a guy who played unbelievably hurt. We know what he ruptured. We don't need to talk about it. It's painful to think about. This is a guy who...
The family jewels, Drew.
Well, I just said we didn't need to talk about it. You know, he gave absolutely everything he could to the Winnipeg Jets. And again, he was put in a position where, at a time, he was the leader that, you know, for a brief period of time, he was the leader that the team needed. But unfortunately, the length of time there was too long, and he couldn't adapt to be the new leader that the team needed. It wasn't something that he could handle. You know, it's not easy to change your stripes. If this is the way you think it should be done, it's hard to be self-aware enough to sit back and say, okay, maybe that's the way it should be done for me, but that's not necessarily the way it needs to be done for everybody. And I need to be the leader for everybody that takes everybody's best course of action into consideration.
And I will say that the organization, you mentioned it earlier, Drew, not maybe having a pulse on this happening until Rick Bowness came in and stripped Wheeler of the captaincy, but not giving him the resources that he needed to maybe have a leadership coach tell him, hey, this is not working. What you're doing within the room is not working. They're not responding to it. You're driving teammates away with your message, whatever the case may be. Because I'm sure Blake Wheeler, like we saw many times on the ice, thought he was doing everything in his power in a positive way for the Winnipeg Jets organization. He probably thought that his way was the right way, and that was going to be the way that it was. And yeah, I think there's 2 sides to this, where the organization, I think, needed to have a better pulse on this and maybe equip him with better suited resources to handle this. And also the Blake Wheeler side of it that we've discussed at length. But yeah, I agree with what you said there, Drew.
Yeah, and just one thing, and sorry, Drew, just want to bring up this comment from Phil, good friend of the show. He says Wheeler literally busted his nut for the team. He's saying it, not you, Drew. It was the locker room that he never adjusted his style, and then the coaching staff allowed it. Like, to me, what stands out to me is that the coaching staff allowed it. That to me is look, Paul Maurice and Blake Wheeler were very close, guys.
Right.
Like, let's be honest here. We've covered the team. I mean, obviously, Connor, this is going back, you know, a little bit, but you've covered the team and you've watched the Jets enough to know, everybody knows that. And I think that was an issue as well, in that it was like you could see that the message and his leadership abilities were lacking, but there was never anything done about it. That's what, like I said, it was. But probably...
I wonder how much, and we'll never probably know the answer to this truthfully, but I wonder how much members of the organization knew that this was becoming a problem, and they were hamstrung to do anything about it by Mark Chipman. And Mark
possible,
Chipman
yeah,
loved,
and Chevy, like not just the owner. Chevy,
yeah, Chevy to
it's the
some
whole.
extent, but I think
Yeah.
less Chevy than Mark Chipman. We know how close and how glowingly Mark Chipman spoke about Blake Wheeler and continues to speak about Blake Wheeler, and how much he valued Blake Wheeler for what he did for the organization, justifiably so. But I do wonder if other members of the organization were more aware that there was a problem here and they weren't able to do anything about it because the owner had some blinders on when it came to Blake Wheeler and it came to his leadership. And like I said, we won't know the answer to that. It's unlikely we'll ever know the answer to it. But I wonder if, again, with truth serum being injected, I wonder how much of a factor that was in the organization's maybe delay in addressing this issue before it got to be too late.
And going back to what we were saying before, like I've seen some comments, Wheeler was great in the community. Like I remember Hockey Manitoba was involved in promoting Ride Inside through the Cancer Care Manitoba Foundation. Blake Wheeler and his wife Sam were very involved with that, right? And I'm sure he did numerous other things in the community, right? So not forgetting his play on the ice. We talked about it. He was an elite player for years and years and years. No, we're not diminishing or taking anything away. We all agree that Wheeler has been great for the community here in Winnipeg, and also we appreciate everything he did for the Jets on the ice. It's specifically what we're talking about as a leader, and that's what the Jets needed at the time. They needed him to step back and let Adam Lowry, Josh Morrissey, Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, they needed those guys to have a bigger voice. That's what it was. That was the culture change. In addition to Rick Bowness coming in for Paul Maurice, and obviously the other coaches that have come in have had an impact as well on the coaching, on the culture. But I think, again, it's just I think these comments, people, it's like people are almost more interested in comments from ex-Jets players, right, guys? Sometimes,
well, because the ex-Jets players speak more honestly than the current Jets players, and that's the reality.
So,
of the situation.
It's obviously provided a nice segment for us this morning, and a lot of people have been talking about it. But I just want to close with this before we go to break. I don't think this changes anything about Blake Wheeler's reputation in Winnipeg. I still think he's beloved. I think people didn't necessarily like the last few years of Blake Wheeler in Winnipeg, but I still think overall people love Blake Wheeler in this city. Like I still don't
appreciated, maybe not beloved, but I would use the word appreciated more than beloved personally.
Fair enough. I mean, yes, he's maybe not at the Dustin Byfuglien level, or he's certainly not at the Dale Hawerchuk level, the late Dale Hawerchuk, but he's certainly still a guy I think most Jets fans appreciate what he did on the ice for all those years.
Okay, I see that Jesse Pierce is backstage, so that's our cue to head to break. I'm going to bid you guys adieu. I have some family obligations I need to deal with right now. Connor and I will be back later tonight with the Illegal Curve post-game show. Ezzy, I'll let you press the commercials button because I screwed it up last time. So I'll say thank you to everyone. We'll see you tonight for the Illegal Curve post-game show. Jesse, Ezzy, Connor up next for more on the Jets and the Minnesota Wild. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later on tonight. You guys take it over from here.
All right. Well, we're finally going to get rid of. Oh, I guess Drew's waiting for me to hit the button. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back. There we go. I wanted to get rid of Drew here, Connor, and Drew was sticking around for an extra second. So we're going to head to break. We'll be back with Jesse Pierce of NHL.com. Stick around. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Ezra Ginsburg and Connor Hrabchuk. We got rid of the dead weight. Drew Mindell, we might as well just call him Drew Deadweight Mindell. We got rid of him. Obviously, no, he had to go be with his family down in Kentucky. And we are very, very pleased to be joined from NHL.com and the Bar Down Beauties podcast. Jesse Pierce, saw you on Winnipeg Sports Talk yesterday. This is becoming like a tour, right? Like you do the Winnipeg Sports Talk Illegal Curve tour when the Jets and Wild play.
Usually I'm on Jets at noon too. I make the rounds. Last go around, I think I literally hit every single stop, but I like it. I enjoy a good Minnesota-Winnipeg matchup. I do find it coincidental that Winnipeg plans to get Minnesota on the second half of a back-to-back most often, and bumping that game time up, I'm sure is really going to help as well. So thanks, guys. That's going to be great for the Minnesota Wild tonight.
And also we've got I don't know if you noticed this. I know you're more focused on the Wild, but the Jets and Leafs play Monday at 1:00 Central. So a very weird 1:00 start time. It's not weird for Toronto because they usually have that game in the afternoon, but weird to see the Jets and the Leafs, a marquee matchup, two division leaders at 1:00 in the afternoon. So yeah, the schedule seems to be all over the place. I don't know about you, Jesse, but I still have to buy some last minute like Christmas, Hanukkah presents. So I'm still trying to find some time in each day to get to the toy store or whatever and get my family some presents. But we brought you on to talk about the Minnesota Wild. Possibly you've got the Minnesota Vikings pennant behind you, so we might talk a little bit about the Vikings, obviously, who are doing really well. And I'll play the role of Drew Mandel. He's a massive Vikings fan. I'm a Vikings fan too, just for the record. I haven't been to the new stadium, but I've gone to I remember going to, what was it, TCF Bank Stadium. They were playing there. Was that what it's called?
In between
Yeah.
when they were out of the Metrodome, that's where the Gophers play, and then before US Bank was open. Yeah.
And just to tell you how long ago it's been, I got to come down and see a Vikings game one of these years. But it was Teddy Bridgewater who was playing quarterback for the Vikings. So I think that must be like 6 or 7 years ago now at this point.
That was a good time for Minnesota fan base, that's for sure.
Yeah. Little sarcasm there, right, Jesse? But let's just start off with, I mean, the Jets are obviously struggling a little bit as well. A bad loss to the Anaheim Ducks in the second game of their road trip. What's the biggest thing? What's the biggest issue with the Wild right now? Because we know they're a good team, only 3 points behind the Jets right now for first in the Central. What's the kind of biggest overarching issue, I guess, that's contributing to this little kind of losing skid as of late?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time they faced adversity this year, which is a credit to them. I mean, they lost 2 in a row in regulation for the first time the next night. That's now extended to 3 in a row and to some good competition, right? You're looking at the Vegas Golden Knights. You're looking at the Florida Panthers. And then last night you were looking at, gosh, who did they even play? Utah. That's right. It's been a week, guys. It has been a week between Christmas and a 5-game homestand. It's been a little bit of a week. But yeah, I mean, I think those injuries are catching up to him. You get Matt Zuccarello back and Jonas Brodin back, who had missed an extended amount of time, but then you lose Jake Middleton, you lose Joel Eriksson Ek, and you lose Philip Gustafsson. And those injuries, those guys look like they're working their way back. Philip Gustafsson was on the ice yesterday with the team. Joel Eriksson Ek joined a little bit later. Jake Middleton will be a little bit of time yet before he gets with the group. So they're getting there, but you're noticing those missing. Philip Gustafsson has had a tremendous season, so you knew that one was going to hurt. Jake Middleton has been huge on the back end. That one's going to hurt. And Joel Eriksson Ek, we've seen it time and time again, how impactful he is in this lineup. And you're noticing the lack of depth, especially up the middle without a guy like Joel Eriksson Ek. Marco Rossi's holding his own on that top line between Matt Zuccarello and Kirill Kaprizov. But Joel Eriksson Ek's that body. He's that big body. And right now it's turned into a one-line team for Minnesota, which you just can't have. Earlier in the year when they were battling some of those injuries, they seem to have more depth. And right now things kind of seem to have taken a turn. The good news for Wild fans, they are better on the road than they are at home. Unfortunate homestand for the team where they dropped 4 or 5, but they've been doing really good on the road. So maybe there is a turning of tides in Winnipeg tonight. We'll see, but I think that's just it. I think this holiday break is coming at a really good time for Minnesota for injuries and just some much needed rest in general.
And I quickly just want to ask about Jacob Middleton, because here in Winnipeg, we lost Dylan Sandberg to a broken foot, and he's the kind of player in your top 4, not going to score many goals, but really effective defensively. I took a quick peek, and I mentioned it earlier on the show. Middleton and Faber on the ice outscored their opponents 23-8 this season, which is the best defensive pairing in the NHL that's played over 200 minutes. So Jake Middleton, not a guy who's going to fill the stat sheet, but clearly has a massive impact on the Wild's top pair.
Yeah, I mean, you saw him and Fabes really take on a huge role last year with the absence of Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin being in and out of the lineup as well, eating up those minutes and finding that offensive capability. That's a really big part of John Hines' scheme and his system is he wants to have defensemen that are able to jump in on the rush and able to contribute offensively. And that's something that Faber and Middleton in particular really embraced. I love it because for Jake Middleton, he calls himself Midstrom in honor of Nicholas Lidstrom when he starts to perform offensively. It's also why he wears number 5. So my absolute favorite, plus you get some great quotes from Jake Middleton when he's scoring. And for a guy that was the last overall pick before Connor McDavid, it's just really great to see. So yeah, you're really hurting him. And this year he was reaching even a new level that I don't think anybody had anticipated him to reach. So it's been fun to watch. You again, Gem quotes top 22x4 is his favorite one this year.
Right.
I love that. Don't know what a 2x4 is, but we'll take it. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, you can't get him back soon enough because he's on LTIR. It's a minimum 10 games and 24 days. That holiday break counts in it. So you're looking at January 7th is as early as he could return. But I think it's going to be an extended period of time with that upper body injury.
Joined by Jesse Pierce of NHL.com and the Bar Down Beauties podcast. And I wanted to ask you about Matt Boldy. And obviously, you know, he's having a great season. You know, he's coming off of 2 really good years. Is he getting enough respect around the NHL? Every time the Jets play the Wild, or anytime I watch the Wild, obviously Kirill Kaprizov he's out of his mind, the skill level. Like, the guy is a legitimate MVP candidate and has been before. But is I feel like Matt Boldy's kind of like what Kyle Connor was 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm not just saying that because he's American either, Jesse, but I mean, is he getting talked about enough in terms of the hockey player he is?
And it's hard when you have a guy like Kirill Kaprizov, right, who kind of steals the show. And Kirill, rightfully so. I mean, the team is nothing without Kirill. We were talking about it last night. It's been 14 periods since the Wild have scored a goal without Kirill Kaprizov on the ice, which is just insane. So, I mean, and you can't have that, right? Like, you need to have more contributors. And Matt Boldy, for the large portion of the start of the season, was that. Now, he's kind of fallen off, which we've seen from Boldy before, right? And he's still a very young player, in each game he makes that 7x7 contract look tremendous and quite the steal. But Bolds has just matured in his game in general. Right now he's going through a little bit of a slump, not just scoring wise, but I'm noticing some lazy penalties and kind of just like the entire team. There's a little bit of frustration there, but Bolds is going to be a really great player. I've said that from the get-go. I know Wild fans were kind of irritated and questioning why the Minnesota Wild selected Boldy at 12 and passed on a guy like Cole Caulfield, who was projected obviously to go much higher. And from watching Matt Boldy with USA at international competition and at the NTDP, you could see that he had this size and this great stick handling. In the past 2 seasons in particular, not only has Boldy just matured into his game, he's used that physical body. He's gotten a lot harder to get off the puck, which I think is a huge asset to his game, and kind of taking a little bit of his pure skill and combining it like a Joel Eriksson-Ek and getting that net front presence, because again, you need to have that grit too. So I'm not worried. Yeah, Boldy is a great complementary scorer, even a secondary scorer to Kirill, which, as we all know, you need. You, again, can't have that one line rolling and nobody else doing anything. So while Bolds is kind of doing a little bit of his up and down right now, he's a great player to watch, a guy that I think teams definitely need to be aware of when he's on the ice.
And for a player that maybe their reputation isn't as high as their actual production, we talk a lot about the Four Nations face-off and how much players will care, something like that. But what do you think a tournament like that could do for Matt Boldy, who was named to Team USA? Maybe he plays on a line with Austin Matthews or with Kyle Connor, or something like that, and maybe goes off in those 4 games. What do you think that can do for a player like him, whose reputation maybe isn't at the point where he's one of the best players on Team USA?
And can I just pay my respects, Connor Hellebuyck? Oh, I cannot wait for the goaltending situation for Team USA, you guys. It's so good. It's so
could
good.
You maybe give us one of your goaltenders there, Jesse?
I know. I don't feel bad for you guys at all, but that goaltending situation, whereas we've got 3 solid guys that I love. I love it so much. You guys will find out how hard it is to score on Connor Hellebuyck, so that's kind of nice to see. Matt Boldy, fantastic at World Championships, right? And he knew going to that tournament was going to be a big showcase for him to Bill Guerin, right? Because certainly while Bill Guerin gets to see him night in and night out, Boldy still had a little bit of something to prove, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of good American hockey players these days, which is a tremendous credit to USA Hockey and the way that they've been able to really step up their development here in the United States. And Bolds is amongst them. He looked great at World Championships, having another good year. And it's funny because you look at it and he's not going to be in those top forward situations, right? He's not going to probably be a top 6, but I think that's okay. I mean, he's going to add to the depth. It's going to be huge. It's going to be a huge confidence builder for him. Four Nations is going to be so much fun. I am so freaking excited for it. Like, it's the best of the best. Like, it's not, even just one good line, two good lines. It's 4 good lines of really good players, as you mentioned. And for Bolts to even be associated with that team, and Brock Faber too, who another Minnesota Wild player has made the team. It's a tremendous honor to have that consideration, and obviously another great way to showcase yourself for the Olympics coming up here in a couple years.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jesse. I think going a couple weeks before the rosters were announced, that's when I started to really get excited. And I realized some people are saying, well, I'm not really excited for this. Wait till the Olympics start. But I'm personally just excited to see some of these players that we haven't seen play together.
Yeah.
And a best on best, right? Just that alone. Obviously I'm Canadian, I'm cheering for Team Canada, but like if Canada doesn't win this, it's not like I'm going to say, I didn't like this tournament. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a great couple weeks of best on best hockey. And I just wanted to switch a little bit. We've been focused on the forwards quite a bit. I mean, maybe Connor will ask you about Jesper Wallstedt. I'm not sure if Connor has a different question, but obviously he's going to get the start tonight versus the Jets. But I wanted to ask you about Declan Chisholm, because he's a guy who obviously was a late round draft pick of the Jets. They lost him to waivers. He's not a guy like when you talk about, the Wild, obviously Jonas Brodin has been a fantastic defenseman for very, very many years. Jared Spurgeon, obviously same thing. Brock Faber, we know he's coming off of just a brilliant rookie season. So Declan Chisholm's, I'm sure not the guy that's talked about the most in Minnesota, but he was a guy that I think the organization, they didn't love losing, because if you look at the Jets' depth right now on the left side, they could use a guy like Declan Chisholm. So I just wanted to ask you kind of what's kind of stood out to you about his play, because he's played in most of the games this year for the Wild.
Yeah, no, he was a nice little find for Minnesota, right? I think there's a little extra sweetness when you take him from Winnipeg, where there was just a numbers game, right? He wasn't able to find a spot there for you guys. I think he's been playing really good minutes. He's found really good chemistry with Jared Spurgeon, which is something that I was kind of surprised to see. I think he's been really able to navigate playing with Spurge, who is a tremendous defenseman and doesn't get enough credit of his own amongst the National Hockey League, right? Especially for a smaller size guy. And Chisholm even has some looks on the top power play unit this year and in different situations. And so he's really risen to that occasion. As of late, again, like most of the team, you're seeing some little bit more egregious turnovers or some kind of just sloppy defensive letdowns. And again, not just to Chisholm, but to everybody amongst the Minnesota Wild, which isn't great, especially when Philip Gustafson's not back there to bail you out. But yeah, I think the Minnesota Wild brass and the Minnesota Wild fans have been really pleased with Chisholm, and that's why he stayed in the lineup. He hasn't been in and out. He hasn't been that healthy scratch that he was maybe even last year a little bit more, because he's really asserted himself as a top 4 defenseman even in the situations when called upon.
Yeah, and as he brought up Jesper Wallstedt, I did want to ask about him, because in 12 games in the AHL this year, just looking up his numbers, .874 save percentage, but in the NHL, up to .890 in the 4 starts. He's going to get the start tonight. Where is he kind of at? Obviously, a first-round pick. You don't see that for goaltenders very often, but where is he at in his development and now being thrust into an NHL role?
Yeah, Jesper kind of opened up a vein with us the other day and was very, very vulnerable about this year's situation. Now, Jesper, a top goaltending prospect, as you'd mentioned, a first-round selection for Minnesota, and everybody knows is kind of the future. We've already dubbed him the Wall in St. Paul, right? I mean, no pressure on the kid. But Philip Gustafson has played outstanding. This year, the plan was to kind of platoon Jesper in and out, or have him be part of a 3-goalie rotation. And that was just based on how the goaltending tandem might look. Well, when Philip Gustafson comes out and as hot as he is, that whole plan kind of got blown up. So Jesper went down to Iowa and struggled mightily. And I think it was a lot of the mental side. He had mentioned he is really working with a sports psychologist just to find his game. He said he just lost all confidence in his ability to stop the puck. And, for a goaltender, kind of important. So, I mean, a testament and credit to him to recognize that those struggles were there, to face that adversity head on. And I think tonight's going to be another test. Unfortunately for him, he's been always kind of thrown into situations and opponents that maybe aren't the best. You go back to last year, he's tossed into Dallas for his first game. This year it was against the Vegas Golden Knights, and now followed up against the Winnipeg Jets. So you're not exactly putting him in the situations where he can get the easy win or the easy save. But, he looked good against Vegas. I think that built in his confidence a little bit, and him just being here is great. And obviously being with Marc-Andre Fleury, that is going to be so invaluable for any goaltender to learn under. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury not playing as much as he's accustomed to, not playing as much as I'm sure he wants to this year. So even from that mental aspect, I think he's going to be great to help Jesper work through it. But I'm excited to see how he performs tonight. I'm excited in general because he is the future. With Marc-Andre Fleury on his farewell tour, it's him and Gus as the tandem next year. There should be no question about that. So getting him in these games while Gus is out and injured is going to be great, and he's only going to go upward and kind of rebound from the tough start I think he had this year.
Jesse, just sticking with Marc-Andre Fleury, who you just mentioned, I think, we'd all agree he's a future Hall of Famer, right? Like, no, I don't think most people are going to argue with that. His resume speaks for itself, right? But what's it been like, for you to cover the team? And I think the Wild are a very interesting team because, we've talked about it a lot. I'm sure when we had you on last month, we talked about this. No, not many people expected the Jets and Wild to be 1-2 in the Central Division and the Western Conference, right? But the Wild are a very interesting team to me because we talked about like the early 20s superstars that they have, but then you've got Marc-Andre Fleury in his late 30s. You've got Matt Zuccarello, and obviously I'm not saying that these guys aren't contributing, but I think you'd agree that having these guys around is really important. Not only are they contributing on the ice, Fleury less so than obviously Zuccarello, but what's it just been like, being a part of the team, around the team for Fleury's farewell tour?
I pinch myself every day that I am covering Marc-Andre Fleury ever since he came about, right? Like, I've had the honor and privilege in my 10 years of NHL coverage to interview the best of the best and to be around, but to cover Marc-Andre Fleury is such an honor because he truly is, and we can talk about it and beat the dead horse. He is the most incredible human being I have ever met, and just so authentically genuine and kind and nice, and really takes consideration into you as a person and just wants to get to know you. Like, he'll always check in like, hey Jess, how are the kids? I mean, just those little things. And not to say other hockey players don't. I think hockey players are the best humans in the world, and I will never argue any otherwise. But Marc-Andre Fleury is just special. Like, he's just a really special guy, and it is hard for him. I've asked him before. I said, this year it's your final year and you've already accomplished so much, but he's a competitor, man. He loves the game. That's fun for him. He wants to be out there. And he said, it is kind of hard, but I get to be around these guys every day, and he is embracing that role. He gets to have fun, and the team is so close. I've covered this team, as I'd mentioned, for nearly 10 years now, and I've seen the locker room not nearly as tight under the leadership of certain guys, and now the past couple seasons, it really is just one unit, which is funny when you've got young kids like Matt Boldy and Brock Faber, and then on the other end, you've got dads like Marcus Foligno and Marc-Andre Fleury and Matt Zuccarello, living seemingly completely opposite lives, but still hanging out and just really having that cohesiveness, which is a big part to their success. And I mean, I think that can't go understated. The Minnesota Wild have been one of the older teams in the National Hockey League for the past couple seasons, but that leadership and the way that they bring those younger guys into the fold and kind of work together, I think, has been tremendous. And that's a credit to Bill Guerin. That's what he wanted to build. That's what he's seen as a player and as a general manager helps win a Stanley Cup in the long run, right? So it's been good. It's a funny dynamic, but it's a good dynamic for sure. And Marc-Andre Fleury, just salt of the earth guy. I just absolutely adore him. I had a young gal shadowing me yesterday out of University of Wisconsin, and we went and talked to just Marc-Andre, and even with her, he's like, so what do you want to do with your career and just all this? And she was like, that was the coolest thing I've ever experienced. And I was like, I know, right? Like, I still get like that because he's a great guy.
It's Connor's, I'll let Connor ask his next question, but it's like, I think people say the same things about Eric Comrie here in Winnipeg.
Okay.
Like, and what I was going to say is like, obviously, they have different ages and everything like that, but like the way I kind of describe, like, being around hockey, and like you said, you've covered hockey for a long time. It's like these people are the real deal, right? It's not like this isn't an act that they're putting on. Certain people like Marc-Andre Fleury, they're legitimately great human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of those in hockey. I agree with you, Jesse, but
Nate
go ahead,
Schmidt
Connor.
was in town the other night, and
Nate Schmidt's another guy.
Yes.
An absolute beauty.
Schmitty, right? Like, just a sweetheart. They're having another baby, so congrats to
all right
him.
Congrats to the Schmidt family.
Exactly. So he's a great guy.
There you go. Yeah, I do want to just quickly ask about the on ice of Marc-Andre Fleury, because even at 40 years old, every Wild game that I watched that he's starting, he's still flying around making these incredible saves. Like, his on ice style has not changed in the slightest. It's fun to watch.
I dapped him up the other night, and I forget. They're all blended together, boys, so I apologize. But it was Jonas Brodin's first game back. egregious turnover at the blue line, and Marc-Andre does this incredible glove save. And so post game, I went over and dapped him. I was like, that was a good save. He's like, not bad for an old man, right? And I was like, not bad for an old man. Like, he's still got it. And again, he has fun with the game, right? I mean, yes, he wants to win, and he takes the losses with a grain of salt and is certainly never happy to be in net for a loss, but he just loves to be out there and do his thing. And my back hurts watching him 90% of the time. And I'm 2 years younger than him. So I'm just like, you keep doing you, man. I think it's the smile. It's his attitude. It's just everything. And he is. And that's the nice thing. I mean, it's hard for Fleury to come in as cold as he's been. He has had very few starts this year. And it's only in certain situations where it's a back-to-back maybe, or Gus is hurt, right, that he's playing more. But he still comes in and is very serviceable, right? Like, it's not, you're not completely having a mistrust in him. I think last night was one of the tougher games we've seen him play this year when he is coming in those situations. But he's still the flower, man. He's still a Hall of Famer, as we've mentioned, and he's still got it. So if we can have any of that flexibility when I'm 40 years old, I will take it for sure.
Absolutely, Jesse. That's going to do it for us in terms of questions. And I just wanted to bring it back to what we were talking about before. We've got to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. Are they going to win the Super Bowl? No, I'm just kidding. But
I mean, we're here in Minnesota. We are used to pain and torture. So what is going to happen is the Minnesota Vikings, they're off to this incredible start behind Sam Darnold, which nobody could have predicted coming, with the exception of maybe Minnesota Vikings fans, because this is what the Vikings do when they have an inconspicuous quarterback. Like, they've done this before back to 2017, right? Like, we've seen them do this with quarterbacks that have no business helping lead them to success. But they're going to lose in a very torturous manner. You go back to 98 and the field goal, like, that's just what they do, right? 2017 ends with Philadelphia absolutely destroying them embarrassingly. Like, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt, but we're prepared for it. We're waiting for that other shoe to drop, because if they win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold as your QB, I don't know. I think the whole state will lose their minds collectively in a good manner.
And there'd be probably a movie that is produced within months of that happening, right?
It'd be wild.
Well, I hope that like I said, as a Winnipegger who cheers for the Vikings, I hope if they don't end up going all the way, I hope they lose in a fashion that isn't torturous.
No,
but
we need that, actually. It's more fun. It's a way better story to tell. That actually makes for a better movie, right? I need a movie about the Doink.
Just being a Vikings fan over the years, right?
The tears, the tear. That's what you have to pay to watch it. Is like you have to give your tears. My kids are now learning what that's like. They're like, oh, well, why are the Vikings not winning? I'm like, because they're the Vikings. All right, this is what we know.
We're not allowed to have nice things.
We're not allowed to have nice things. Ever.
Jesse Pierce of NHL.com and the Bar Down Beauties podcast. We always appreciate you coming on. You were on Winnipeg Sports Talk yesterday. You often do the CJOB pregame show. So we always appreciate you. You're very knowledgeable. You're an awesome person. And obviously you're welcome to come back anytime to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. So I want to, on behalf of all of us, wish you season's greetings, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. I hope you have a great time off with your family and friends. And like I said, it should be a great game between the Jets and Wild tonight. Always is, it seems.
I look forward to it. One day I will get up to Winnipeg and say hello in person to all of you good guys. Because as much as my Wild fans hate to hear it, I have a soft spot in my heart for the Jets. I really do. And I love that rivalry. It's my favorite one by far. So you guys have a great holidays. Looking forward to a good tilt tonight at 6.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jesse. And if you do come back, we'll make sure that we do an Illegal Curve Winnipeg Sports Talk. We'll take you out, show you all the local watering holes and everything like that.
I love it.
But yeah, absolutely. Come up to Winnipeg. Maybe when it's a little less cold, like.
I mean, I'm used to the cold, so it's like it never would, like, everyone, that's their big gripe, right? Like, but Winnipeg's so cold. I'm like, we live in Minnesota. What is this? Like, when did we become soft down here? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's true. But... Well, Drew was in Kentucky, and he's complaining about, I think it's 30 degrees in Kentucky, and it's like it's like 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not good with the conversions, but it's a lot warmer in Kentucky than it is in Winnipeg. So Drew Mandel is soft for a Manitoban for sure.
Make sure he knows it too.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. Best of happy holidays.
You too. Bye-bye.
Jesse Pierce of NHL.com joining us. As I mentioned, she was on Winnipeg Sports Talk, so we appreciate it. She's so knowledgeable. Nobody knows more about the Minnesota Wild than her, maybe with the exception of maybe Michael Russo, who's been covering the team for a long time. But just to wrap it up here, we've got a few minutes here. Jets and Wild, obviously. We should mention again, you're going to be joining Drew on the Legal Curve post-game show tonight. I have a Hanukkah party at my friend Hart's house. So obviously that's what is preventing me from doing the post-game show tonight. Otherwise, I would obviously be on the post-game show. But just quickly here with a few minutes left, what are you looking forward to? What do you want to see more so out of the Jets tonight? I mean, that's a very open-ended question for you, Connor, because the game against Anaheim, was probably the worst game of the year. So I think the Jets, you would agree, there's a lot of areas for improvement.
Scoring chances and shots on goal. That's what I want to see. It's them have more than 8 shots through the first 2 periods. That would be so much fun if they did that. No, seriously answering the question, I think they need to have, I know asking for all 4 lines to be rolling is a tall task. They need to have another line going other than the Scheifele line, because like I said earlier on in the show, a lot has been placed on that line without Nikolai Ehlers in the lineup. Well, Ehlers is back now. The Lowry line typically thrives in these Wild games. And if you remember the Wild game on the road, that was a Connor Hellebuck masterclass. But the third period, the Jets turned it on, and it was mainly the bottom 6. Or the bottom 6 had all the goals in that game. The top 2 lines had none. So I'm really looking for maybe the bottom 6 to chip in offensively. And then obviously over analyzing the third pairing and how Ville Heinola and Colin Miller look together. But that's what I'll be watching for tonight.
Yeah, I the things that you mentioned, Connor, I'm similar for me. I think, to expect everything to improve, I think is asking a little bit too much. But certainly, you want to see more of a team effort. You don't want to just see the Jets relying on the power play, relying on the brilliance of the Scheifele, Connor, Vilardi line. And as you mentioned, hopefully we're going to see a great game from Ville Heinola and Colin Miller, because we expect that, possibly to be a pair, going forward after the holiday break. We'll see what happens here, with Dylan Samberg coming back, and then obviously Logan Stanley could be an option here. It might be more of a rotation. Most likely will be more of a derotation for January and beyond. But Connor, want to give you a huge shout out. Thank you so much for stepping up. We didn't
Thank you for having
me. We weren't sure if Drew was going to be available, obviously, because he's in Kentucky doing the family thing. So big thanks to you for stepping up, and obviously big thanks to you for stepping up on tonight's post-game show. And then me and you will be doing the post-game show Monday afternoon when the Jets visit the Toronto Maple Leafs. So obviously you're going to be seeing a lot of Connor on the Illegal Curve post-game show and hockey show. And also make sure you check out Connor's next day takeaways. It's always a good, I love reading it in the morning when I get to the office. So make sure you check that out on illegalcurve.com. Check out his work on Winnipeg Sports Talk, including tomorrow, Winnipeg Sports Talk Sunday Live. Are Liz and Jacob both going to be on the show tomorrow?
I don't know. That's the question. Yeah. That is the question. We'll see.
It's like the Jets derotation, right? Like you never know what's going to happen.
Who's in? We don't know. No, I think they're both in because they are both going to be there tonight. It's the WST night. They're both covering the game as well. Like we're all going to be up in the press box there, so they'll be in for it tomorrow. They're both fired up for it. It's going to be so much fun.
Okay, right on. So make sure you guys check that out on the Winnipeg Sports Talk YouTube channel, Winnipeg Sports Talk Sunday Live. Want to give a quick shout out to all of our sponsors of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show and illegalcurve.com. Play Now, the title sponsor of this program, Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club. Just saw that Kevin Farley, obviously brother of the late Chris Farley, they just announced that Kevin Farley is going to be back at Rumors. He's been at Rumors many times over the years. Tickets go on sale on Monday for Kevin Farley. So if you want to check out the late Chris Farley's brother, he's hilarious. I might have to get tickets, or I might have to hit up Drew for some tickets for that show. I believe he's coming in March. So big thanks to Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, longtime sponsor of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. City Place, Boston Pizza, Holt Dental, and Seagram's. There's going to be a Seagram shot of the game tonight when Connor's doing the post-game show with Drew, and there's also going to be a Seagram shot of the game when Connor and I do the show on Monday afternoon when the Jets visit the division-leading, Atlantic Division-leading Toronto Maple Leafs. So we want to give a big thanks for everybody for joining us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's almost the afternoon, Connor. Be safe out there. The roads are a little slippery. Don't get too stressed out if you haven't bought all of your Christmas, Hanukkah presents. Just be mindful that everybody else is feeling a little bit stressed out this time of year as well. So thanks again, everybody, for listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, and we will see you tonight on the Illegal Curve YouTube channel for the post-game show after the Jets and Wild game. So thanks everybody for listening/watching, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from Illegal Curve Hockey. For more great Illegal Curve content, subscribe to the Illegal Curve YouTube channel, follow @Illegal Curve on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit your online home for hockey in Winnipeg, illegalcurve.com.